Alike. Welcome to Black and Gold Central here on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. It is Friday. Follow Friday on Twitter, May 2nd. 6 days until the 2014 NFL Draft. And of course, the NFL Draft has been pushed back another 2 weeks this year. Traditionally, it's been a late April event, but this year it's going to be held in the second Sunday of May. So we have a couple of extra weeks here to go over the Steelers mock draft and the NFL mock draft in general, and to take a last look at a lot of the prospects. But I just wanted to talk about the draft being 2 weeks later, because it's interesting the way it happens now is, for the first time, the NFL draft is going to be held after the Kentucky Derby, which of course is tomorrow at Churchill Downs. It's kind of weird. I don't know how I'm supposed to be going over to Monmouth Park over there in New Jersey and placing my Kentucky Derby wager when I'm going to have to be hard at work tomorrow on Steeler Addicts and on the Sports Daily doing some draft writing. You know, usually the draft is over, and then it's Kentucky Derby, and then it's springtime. Now, with the Kentucky Derby going on and still tons and tons of mock drafts circulating the internet, we're sort of mixing events on the sports calendar. There's something a little weird about that. It's almost like a kid sitting on Santa Claus's lap wearing a Halloween costume. We're mixing things up, and it's just a little strange, but this is what Roger Goodell wants. He wants the 2 weeks of extra hype to lead up to the draft, just to sort of fill up the sports calendar there, so people are talking about the NFL year round. And he also has moved it. Traditionally the draft was late April, and it was Saturday, Sunday. I believe the first 2 rounds were on Saturday, and then the 3rd through 7th round were held on the Sunday, a day 1 and a day 2. Now Goodell has made it a primetime event, starting it on Thursday nights, and you know how Roger Goodell loves Thursdays. He loves the NFL on Thursday, with every team playing at least one Thursday night game in the NFL now. So now, round 1 will be held, and just round 1 will be held next Thursday at Radio City Music Hall in New York. Rounds 2 and 3 will be held on Friday, and then rounds 4 through 7 will be held on Saturday. So now it's a 3-day event, and now there's talk that they're going to make it a 4-day event. I mean, you know what? If we're going to make it a 4-day event, there are 256 picks in the draft. Why not make it a 256-day event with 1 pick each day? Now, there are more than 256 days in the NFL offseason, of course. There are actually, I counted it, math geek that I am, there are 214 days between the Super Bowl, between Super Bowl 48 and the Thursday night opener in September. 214 days. So, like, if Roger Goodell wanted to make the NFL draft spread it over every single day of the offseason, he'd probably have to eliminate a round or 2 and reduce the compensatory picks. I wouldn't put it past him with all the tinkering that Roger Goodell does. I mean, he wants 14 playoff teams in the NFL now. You know, I mean, and you know, before you know it, we're gonna have NFL games every night of the week, just like college football. We're gonna have a Tuesday night game, you know, a Wednesday night game, Friday night games. You know, the NFL is a Sunday sport. With all the, you know, I understand not wanting to stand pat and always wanting to improve the product, but it just seems that what Roger Goodell does, it's just tinkering. I think his favorite toys when he was a kid were Tinker toys, because he's always tinkering with the NFL. So don't fix what isn't broken, Roger. Okay, now, do I have you all fired up now? Are we all fired up? Are you ready for my latest and final on-air Pittsburgh Steelers 2014 mock draft? This is the one that I published yesterday on Steeler Addicts. We go over all 7 rounds, all 9 of the Steelers picks. So, without further ado, let's take a look at round 1. Okay, the first round. I think, in my mock draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Odell Beckham, wide receiver from LSU. Now, we might be getting some oohs and ahs out there. Odell Beckham, the popular pick here is Darqueze Dennard, the cornerback of Michigan State. He's going to the Steelers in a lot of the mock drafts. Now, let me explain. I have this sneaking suspicion, and I also published a 2-round NFL mock draft earlier this week on the Sports Daily, which is another site I write for that covers the NFL in general, league-wide. And I did a 2-round mock draft there, and I also had Beckham going to the Steelers there. And I had Beckham going to the Steelers in my Steelers mock draft for Steeler Addicts because I have a sneaking suspicion that the Chicago Bears, who are at number 14, are going to pick Darqueze Dennard. The Steelers, of course, pick at number 15, their highest pick in the NFL draft since they took Lawrence Timmons with a number 15 pick in 2007. Now, the Chicago Bears, they need a safety. They need help all over their defense. And one interesting stat about the Chicago Bears is that in 2013, they scored 445 points. Okay? That is second in franchise history, only to the 1985 Chicago Bears. That's interesting. You think the 85 Bears, you think defense. But I guess what a lot of people don't realize is that that was also their most prolific scoring offense in franchise history, too, part of the reason they won the Super Bowl. And last year, they scored the second most points in franchise history, 445. Now, the problem was their defense. The Bears allowed 478 points. That's the most in franchise history. Now you're saying, okay, this is a Steelers podcast. Why are you talking about the Bears? Well, they're the team that sits right in front of the Steelers in the first round of the mock draft. So we got to talk about a little bit about what their tendency or their need is going to be in the draft. And they need pretty much help all over their defense, kind of like the Steelers. Okay, and at cornerback, Charles Tillman is 33, and Tim Jennings and Kelvin Hayden are both 30. So, there are 2 elite safeties in this draft, HaHa Clinton-Dix and Calvin Pryor. Okay, the Bears could go that way, although I think at least one of them is going to be gone by the time the Bears pick. But, I think that even though this isn't a deep draft for safeties, unless it's Troy Polamalu, you really have to be sure about a safety, before picking him in the first round. So I think at the last minute, the Bears are going to go cornerback. They're going to pick Darqueze Dennard, and then that's going to leave the Steelers with what I think also cornerback Justin Gilbert and 6'4" 4¾ receiver Mike Evans off the board. Okay, so the Steelers then will probably be choosing at that point at number 15 between Kyle Fuller, the cornerback from Virginia Tech, and Odell Beckham, who at this point I predict will be the best receiver remaining on the board. Now, I like Kyle Fuller. He's sort of been rising in a lot of his draft stock has been rising. I watched him on tape, and I like him. He's a really good tackler. He breaks up a lot of passes, but I just don't think he's the best value at number 15. I think if the Steelers picked in the 20s, he would be good there. But for the top half of the first round, I don't think Kyle Fuller is quite good enough. So on offense, wide receiver is the Steelers' top need. And Odell Beckham, he's a junior from LSU, and by the way, I made an error, which I corrected with the cross-out technique in my Steeler Addicts article. I said he was a senior, but he is a junior, and he's 5'11". and 198 pounds, Odell Beckham. So, and the Steelers, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, have told Ben Roethlisberger that they're going to pick a tall wide receiver in the early rounds of this draft. Beckham's only 5'11". He's not a tall receiver, but in the first round, he's the best receiver on the board, and I'd like to see him in a Steelers uniform. He's a sure-handed receiver. He's got some speed. He could improve a little bit as a blocker, but he can block. And he's also a good kick returner. He definitely would be an upgrade over Felix Jones as a kick returner for the Steelers. And he could step in right away, Odell Beckham, and be that number 2 receiver behind Antonio Brown. The Steelers can get their tall receiver later in the draft. Their tall receiver, red zone threat. They can get that guy later. This is a deep draft for wide receivers. So I think the Steelers go with Odell Beckham, a wide receiver from LSU in the first round of the NFL draft. And, the other thing, too, about the Steelers telling Roethlisberger they're going to take a tall receiver, I'm kind of wondering why they would do that, because they're kind of handcuffing themselves. You don't know how the board is going to shake out, and if you're really committed to, if you really have to get that tall receiver, you're putting yourself in an awkward spot because you don't know who's going to be available when you pick. It was in 2008, before the 2008 draft, when Ben Roethlisberger first publicly lobbied for a tall receiver. So what do the Steelers do? They get, in the second round of that draft, they draft Limas Swede. His stock had dropped that year because he was coming off an injury, and so the Steelers, late in the second round, they saw Swede and thought he was a good value. It didn't turn out that way. He was a bust. So, the Steelers, I kind of wonder why they told Roethlisberger they would do this, unless it's an elaborate smokescreen. That could be the case, too. There's a lot of people telling half-truths or not really telling the truth because they might want to throw off the dogs in terms of who other teams think they're going to pick. So, maybe was somebody sitting right behind the Steelers in the second round thinking the Steelers are going to go tall receiver, and then they pick somebody else. So we'll see. But in the first round, the Steelers go with Odell Beckham, wide receiver. And then in the second round, I got the Steelers taking defensive tackle Stephon Tuitt of Notre Dame. Okay? He's a junior. He's 6'6". He's 304 pounds. His production dropped off a little bit last year because of he had hernia surgery during the off season. Okay, and this is the number 46 pick overall, by the way, for the Steelers. Stephon Tuitt of Notre Dame. A lot of people are going to be thinking that, okay, wait a minute, the Steelers really need a cornerback. First 2 rounds they didn't get one. Well, they need help on the front 7 too. An effective front 7 that can stop the run and get to the quarterback can make any cornerback or any defensive back look a lot better. So it starts with the front 7, and Stephon Tuitt can really help out on a very depleted Steelers defensive line. They have no one right now, no defensive lineman who has started more than 15 games in a season. And that guy who started 15 games is Cam Thomas, who got signed who the Steelers signed. He's a nose tackle who the Steelers signed from the San Diego Chargers. He started 15 games in his career, but he actually lost his starting job last year, late in the year, when he played for the Chargers. And then beyond that, you have Cameron Hayward, who started 13 games last year, and then Steve McClendon, who has 11 career starts. So no one on the defensive line right now has started a full season for the Steelers. Brett Kiesel remains a free agent. Maybe the Steelers are going to see what they get in the draft before giving him a call. But in the second round, And this is a guy who went in the first round in a lot of mock drafts, during the season and early in the pre-combine draft process. But Stephon Tuitt, he's 6'6", he can get his hands on some passes. Stephon Tuitt, defensive tackle from Notre Dame, going to the Steelers in the second round of my Steelers mock draft. And the third round, the Steelers do not have their original third-round pick. They traded it to the Cleveland Browns last year so they could draft Shamarko Thomas in the fourth round. Okay, so they pick, and that compensatory pick is the 97th overall pick. It's going to be the 33rd pick of the third round. So there's going to be a long wait between the Steelers' second-round pick and their third-round pick. That's 51 picks they're going to go by before the Steelers pick again in the third round. Okay, and I have the Steelers taking Bashaud Breeland, cornerback of Clemson. They finally get a cornerback. They'll get their cornerback before the end of day 2 of the draft. And Breeland, he is 5'7". No, he's not 5'7". I'm 5'7". Or I could get away with saying that I'm 5'8", but Bashaud Breeland is definitely taller than that. He's 5'11", 197 pounds, and he's a junior. He broke up 10 passes last year for Clemson, intercepted 4 passes, and he would be the Steelers' first cornerback chosen. And Philip Gaines of Rice is probably going to be available to the Steelers when they pick at number 46. They're in the second round, but I think that's a bit of a reach for them. And Breeland, he's not an elite cornerback, but just the way the draft board shakes out, he's who the Steelers get there in the third round to fulfill their need at cornerback. Now, Ike Taylor will be back next year, but he's 34. Cortez Allen, he started 8 games last year. It's, and he's definitely coming along, but he really needs to keep progressing next year, Cortez Allen, and really become that full-time starter, a ball hawk cornerback there. And then they still have William Gay. According to Pro Football Focus, William Gay had his best season last year. So even if William Gay has the same kind of season next year that he had last year, and Cortez Allen really makes that step forward, you have an aging Ike Taylor there for depth, and at the very least, they need depth at cornerback. So they get Bashaud Breeland, a cornerback from Clemson, there in the third round of my Pittsburgh Steelers mock draft. So that's going to end day 2 of the mock draft, the first 3 rounds. That's just to review: Odell Beckham, wide receiver of LSU, in the first round. In the second round, that's Bashaud Breeland, a cornerback from Clemson, and then the third in the second round is Stephon Tuitt of Notre Dame, and in the third round is Bashaud Breeland, the cornerback from Clemson. In the fourth round, this is the number 118th pick overall for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Taylor Hart, defensive end of Oregon. He is a senior. He is 6'6". He's 281 pounds. He sort of borders on being a little bit too small there for the Steelers' 3-man front. The Steelers need guys who are right around 300 pounds there at their defensive end position in their 3-man front. So Hart, he just borders on being big enough there, but he's very versatile. He's lined up. He's even lined up at outside linebacker. He's played defensive end and defensive tackle. He's a versatile guy there. He's sort of a Swiss Army knife front 7 defensive guy there. Taylor Hart from Oregon, and so he could really be a valuable pick there in the fourth round for the Steelers. He batted down 11 passes too. So with Stephon Tuitt and Taylor Hart, The Steelers could have 2 6'6" guys there, could really get some height there on their defensive line. And it's interesting. It's been 20 years since the last time that the Steelers have chosen 2 defensive linemen in the 4th round. And this would be a good year to start because, and by the way, they got Brenson Buckner in the 2nd round that year. So that worked out pretty well. But considering just how thin the Steelers are in the defensive line, it might behoove them to pick 2 defensive linemen there in the first 4 rounds. They haven't done it since 1994. We'll see if they do it this year. 5th round. This is the 157th pick in the draft. And I have the Steelers taking Ross Cockrell, cornerback, Duke. He's a senior. He's 6 feet, 191 pounds. Now, in my previous Steeler Addicts mock draft, I had Cockrell going to the Steelers in the 6th round. But his stock has been rising, okay? And I think that he might actually go in the 3rd or 4th round at this point. So me putting him in the 5th round, going to the Steelers, they'd be lucky to get him there. So if he's sitting there in the 4th round for the Steelers, if he's sitting there in the 5th round, if he's sitting there in the 5th round for the Steelers, I think they should definitely get him. Now, he's a little small. I looked at his his video on YouTube. He seemed to be blocked really too easily sometimes, but in the East-West Shrine game, I was really impressed with his tackling, and he also made an interception to secure the victory for the East in the East-West Shrine game. And also, he intercepted a pass for Duke to seal their win over Wake Forest. So, Ross Cockrell, he has a tendency to rise to the occasion. He's a cornerback prospect who can really grow on you. So, I got him going to the Steelers in the 5th round, and that would be the Steelers' 2nd cornerback taken in the first 5 rounds and in this draft. The Steelers have had a spotty record drafting cornerbacks over the last 7 years or so, but they seem to do better. Like when they take 2 corners in a draft, one of them tends to work out and one of them tends to be a bust. In 2009 it was Keenan Lewis in the 3rd round and Joe Burnett in the 5th round. Burnett was only there for a year, but Keenan Lewis, although he was a late bloomer, the Steelers did get 1 good year out of him. But by then it was too late. They already made up their mind that Cortez Allen would take over for him. And then in the 2011 draft, it was Curtis Brown taken in the 3rd round and Cortez Allen in the 4th round. Those picks should have been flip-flopped because Cortez Allen, he is a starter, a full-time starter in the making. The Steelers hope. And then Curtis Brown, the Steelers released him during this offseason. So Curtis Brown, definitely a bust. So doubling up on cornerbacks. The Steelers don't get that first-round cornerback, but they take 2 here, according to my Steelers mock draft. Now, also in the 5th round, the Steelers have another compensatory pick. This is the 173rd pick overall, and I have the Steelers taking Prince Shembo, outside linebacker of Notre Dame. He's 6'1", 253 pounds, and he is a senior. Now, the Steelers are hoping that Jarvis Jones takes a big step forward in his 2nd year. He only had one sack in his rookie season, and he actually had his best game in the season finale against the Browns. But if he doesn't improve, he could be a bust. Okay, so the jury's still out on him. It's only been a year, but he really needs to make progress in his 2nd year, and he'll have a chance to because he'll be starting. And then Jason Worlds, who the Steelers applied the transition tag to, he really came on in the 2nd half of the season last year. I believe he had 7 sacks, all in the 2nd half of the season. So he really took a big step forward, but the Steelers want to see him do it for a full year. So they need Jarvis Jones to take a step forward, and they need and they need Jason Worlds to do for a full year what he did in the second half of the 2013 season. And if even one of those things doesn't happen, they could be in trouble, because right now their top backup at outside linebacker is Chris Carter. Okay, and he's entering his 4th season, and he has yet to register a sack in the NFL. He hasn't had many chances. He's been playing primarily on special teams, but he really hasn't done much to distinguish himself and earn more playing time on defense. So the Steelers, at the very least, need depth at outside linebacker, and they also might need insurance in case what Worlds did last year was a flash in the pan, or if Jarvis Jones ends up being a bust. So in the 5th round with their compensatory pick, I got the Steelers picking outside linebacker Prince Shembo of Notre Dame. Now, according to NFL.com, Prince Shembo addressed this at the scouting combine, but he was investigated for an incident. He was involved. He was investigated for an alleged sexual assault incident at Notre Dame, where a student later ended up committing suicide. He was not charged in that incident. He was not charged in that matter, and he was upfront about it. He was upfront that he was investigated for it when he talked about it at the combine. So the Steelers are just going to need to be really sure about Prince Shembo's character before they draft him. But he was upfront about it, so we'll see where he lands in the draft. Okay, 6th round. We are at number 192, the 192nd overall pick in the draft. In the 6th round, I have the Steelers taking James Hurst, offensive tackle, North Carolina. Senior, 6'5", 296 pounds. Now, this is a housewarming gift for Mike Munchak, the Steelers' new offensive line coach. Now, you think, okay, Ben Roethlisberger, he was sacked a lot less in the second half of last season. The offensive line did a much better job protecting him. And the only thing is, they still need a little bit of depth on that offensive line. And I think they're a little bit more set on the interior of that offensive line than they are at tackle. Kelvin Beachum did a good job at left tackle last year. And for now, he deserves to be the incumbent in that spot. But you just got to wonder if he doesn't have the prototypical body type for the position. And so we'll see if he can do this long term. And James Hurst, he played exclusively at left tackle at North Carolina. So, he could be there as a backup at left tackle in case Kelvin Beachum falters. In terms of right tackle, if James Hurst translates into more of a right tackle in the NFL, there figures to be a position battle between Mike Adams and Marcus Gilbert at right tackle next season. Now, maybe James Hurst, if he's drafted by the Steelers, perhaps James Hurst might have something to say about that, but then again, this is a 6th round pick, and so your expectations for a 6th round pick aren't as high as you would get for a 2nd round pick or a 3rd round pick. But the reasoning behind this pick is because the Steelers do need a little bit of depth on that offensive line, and also at 296 pounds, he might seem a little light on paper, but he has the body type for Munchak's own blocking scheme. You don't have the big, beefy, lumbering, 330 pounders in that type of blocking scheme. So James Hurst would definitely be a scheme fit for Mike Munchak as a 6th round pick, number 192 in this mock draft. And now the Steelers also have a compensatory pick in the 6th round. That's number 215. And I have the Steelers taking Jeff Janis, wide receiver, Saginaw Valley State. He's a senior. He's 6'3", 219 pounds. There is your tall receiver, Ben Roethlisberger. Now, Saginaw Valley State is a Division II school, and despite that, Jeff Janis was invited to play in the Senior Bowl. He caught 83 passes last year, 14 for touchdowns for 1,572 yards. And a lot of people, a lot of my commenters, and if any of you have commented on any of my articles on Steeler Addicts, I want to thank you right now. And a lot of you like Jeff Janis and would love to see the Steelers take Jeff Janis. I have him going to them in the 6th round, number 215. As a Division II guy, he could fall that far. Then again, he might not. He could go earlier than that. But in this mock draft, he goes to the Steelers at number 215. Don't forget that Antonio Brown was a 6th round pick too. Okay, so now this would be Jeff Janis would be the first Division II player chosen by the Steelers since Ricardo Coakley in the 2nd round of the 2004 draft. Okay, now hopefully Jeff Janis works out a little bit better than him. The Steelers, Coakley contributed more as a kick returner for the Steelers more than a cornerback. Okay, but he was largely a bust. If Jeff Janis doesn't work out, you know what? He's a 6th round pick. A 6th round pick, a bust in the 6th round, if you can even call 6th round picks a bust. But a bust in the 6th round won't set your franchise back like a 2nd round bust will. And the Steelers have had their share of 2nd round busts. Alonzo Jackson, Limas Swede, and Ricardo Coakley, who I just mentioned. Okay, so Jeff Janis, wide receiver, Saginaw Valley State, going to the Steelers in the 6th round, number 215 overall in my Steelers mock draft. And last but not least, or maybe least, who knows, but in the 7th round, the Steelers have the number 230 pick, the 230th pick in the draft in the 7th round. I have them taking Isaiah Lewis, safety of Michigan State. He's a senior. He's 5'10" and 211 pounds, and it's interesting. According to this mock draft, the top 3 picks that the Steelers are taking in this mock draft are all juniors, but the last 6 are all seniors. That's interesting. I guess if you're good enough to come out as a junior, then you're good enough to go in an early round. If you got to stay in school all 4 years, then maybe you're a mid-round or a late-round pick. But Isaiah Lewis, safety of Michigan State, is a senior. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, this would be the Steelers' 6th defensive player chosen in the 2014 draft, if they followed my advice and take these players in this mock draft. Now, since the NFL draft went to 7 rounds in 1994, they've never chosen more than 5 players in the same draft. They chose 5, they've never chosen more than 5 defensive players in the same draft. Last year they chose 5 defensive players. Okay. This would be the first time in the 7-round draft era that the Steelers take 6 defensive players. Now's the time to do it. This is the worst showing stopping the run since 1992, since at least 1999, before they had Casey Hampton. So this is their defense has been slipping. They're really a middle of the pack defense in the NFL right now, and the Steelers, their Super Bowl teams, have always gone to the Super Bowl on the strength of an elite defense, and they don't have anything close to that right now. And meanwhile, their offense is just missing a piece or two. They're missing that tall receiver for Ben Roethlisberger. And receivers in general. And in this mock draft, they got 2. They're taking 2 receivers. So they need more wide receivers. They need a little depth at running back and a little bit of depth on the offensive line. That's what they need on offense. But on defense, they need corners. They need depth at safety. They need depth at outside linebacker, and they need any defensive lineman. So there are more needs on defense than on offense, and I really think that in this draft, an overwhelming majority of their picks, and I've said this before, but an overwhelming majority of their picks should be defensive players. Okay, so there's your Steelers mock draft here, which I published on Steeler Addicts. And by the way, too, I want to point out that in my two-round NFL mock draft that I published on the Sports Daily, I had Beckham going to the Steelers, but I also had Philip Gaines going to them in the second round. So this one's different because I had Stephon Tuitt going to the Steelers in the second round, both on Steeler Addicts and here on Black and Gold Central. You know, I decided when I did my my Steelers mock draft on Steeler Addicts that maybe Gaines isn't quite a second-round value. So I went with Stephon Tuitt, going kind of on the philosophy that they need defensive linemen. And so to review my latest Steelers mock draft, in the first round it's Odell Beckham, wide receiver of LSU. Second round, Stephon Tuitt, defensive tackle, Notre Dame. Third round, Bashaud Breeland, cornerback, Clemson. Fourth round, Taylor Hart, defensive end, Oregon. Fifth round, Ross Cockrell, cornerback, Duke. Sixth round, Prince Shembo, outside linebacker, Notre Dame. Sixth round, James Hurst, offensive tackle, North Carolina. Sixth round, also, Jeff Janis, wide receiver, Saginaw Valley State. And seventh round, Isaiah Lewis, safety, Michigan State, and that seventh round pick. The draft board gets very fluid in the seventh round. The Steelers could pretty much go with any position in the seventh round, but I figured, just to sort of put a final stamp on this being a defensive themed draft, they should find somebody on defense. And even if Isaiah Lewis projects as nothing more than a special teams contributor, okay. So now, there's your Steelers mock draft, and I kind of talked about here how moving back the mock draft until after the Kentucky Derby, how that's a little different, how that might be a little bit awkward on the sports calendar. Now, last week, and this will get back to the whole Kentucky Derby theme here, but last week on Black and Gold Central, I actually made a serendipitous discovery here. I forgot to put on my headphones for the show. Okay, I have the headphones with the mic that goes with it, and that's what I always used on my previous podcast. But last week I just forgot to put them on, but I realized that the mic on my new computer is good enough so that it can carry my voice, and I don't need those headphones anymore. So I don't have the headphones surrounding my head, and so I kind of thought about that and realized that, I can wear the fedora that a lot of you are so familiar with if you look at my my Twitter avatar. Okay, now this isn't quite a Kentucky Derby hat. Okay, this isn't a Kentucky Derby. Those big wide-brimmed Kentucky Derby hats that the women wear, and you know what? Men don't wear Kentucky Derby hats anyway. So this is a fedora that I actually bought a few years ago on some street corner in Manhattan, okay, and I kind of realized that if I don't have to wear headphones on this show, I can wear other things on my head. And so a lot of you might be looking at the podcast thinking, okay, this guy doesn't look familiar to me. But I put on the fedora, which is the fedora I wear on my Twitter handle, and you're like, oh, okay, now I know. That's Mike Batista. Okay, he's on Steel Tweets on Twitter. Okay, I recognize him now, so we'll see what kind of reaction we get with the fedora. It might be long gone and hard to find next week. But next week, we will be back next week. Next Friday, it'll be a great time to be on because we're going to talk about who the Steelers pick in the first round of the draft, and then we're going to look ahead to who they should pick in the second and third round. And really, what they do on day 2 is going to be just important as what they do, on day 1, because you really need second and third round picks to really contribute to, if you're an NFL franchise. So that's going to be a great little time slot to have next week. We hope you enjoyed this show, and we hope you listen again next week. And you can always follow Black and Gold Central on Twitter at BNG Central, and you can follow me at Steel Tweets. That's Steel__ tweets. And I want to thank you for watching and listening, and we'll be back next week.